When Jimmy shares a forgotten story from Keanu's past, the whole studio laughs, until Keanu suddenly looks down, overcome by a memory he's never spoken about on TV. In that quiet moment, the show turns from late-night comedy into a raw, emotional confession that stuns Jimmy and the audience. Jimmy's laughing as he tells the story, but Keanu is. His eyes drift down, his fingers lock together, and for a second the entire studio feels like it's holding its breath, as if everyone just stepped into a memory that suddenly hurts a little too much. The cameras are still rolling, the city lights are blazing behind them, and Jimmy thinks he's just set up another funny late-night bit. He leans forward in his chair, grinning, reading off the card in his hand. "So, Keanu," he says, "do you remember that night on the freeway, the one your old stunt coordinator told us about?" The audience chuckles, expecting a crazy Hollywood story with explosions and punchlines. But the moment Jimmy says freeway, something changes in Keanu's face. Barely visible, a tiny flicker of pain that looks a lot like regret. He glances at the older man sitting beside him, the white-haired guest who's been smiling quietly this whole time. This is Marcus Hale, the legendary stunt coordinator who'd worked with Keanu for years. To everyone watching at home, he's just another Hollywood veteran with behind-the-scenes stories. But to Keanu, he's the man who once pulled him off the edge of a very different kind of cliff, one that had nothing to do with movies and everything to do with who Keanu was becoming off camera. Jimmy doesn't see any of that yet. He's hyped, playing to the crowd. "Marcus told us this wild thing you did. No wires, no doubles, just you, a speeding car, and—" He lifts his eyebrows, waiting for Keanu to jump in with a self-deprecating joke. The band is ready to punch in a musical sting the moment the laughter hits. This was supposed to be light, safe, late-night TV. But Keanu's hands are suddenly still, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if the memory Jimmy just opened isn't a stunt reel, it's a wound. In Keanu's head, the studio disappears. He's back on that freeway set 10 years earlier, the asphalt still damp from an overnight rain, the sky over Los Angeles washed pale gray. He remembers the hum of generators, the smell of gasoline, the chill of early morning air creeping through his jacket. He remembers how proud he felt that day, how sure of himself. The director had called him fearless in front of the crew. The word had stuck to his ego like gasoline on dry cloth, ready to burn. Marcus had been there too, younger but still with that same calm presence, the kind that made even the craziest set feel safe. Before the big stunt, he'd walked up to Keanu, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything, kid," he'd said. "Not to me, not to them, not to the cameras. The bravest guys I know are the ones who know when to say no." Keanu had smiled, nodded, pretended to take it in. And then stepped onto the freeway anyway, determined to show he could do it all himself. No double, no wires, no limits. Back in the studio, the audience is starting to sense that something's off. Keanu still hasn't answered. Jimmy's smile softens a little, his showman instinct tugging at him. There's a different kind of silence rising now, one that doesn't belong on a talk show. Marcus watches Keanu carefully, his eyes filled with something that looks like both pride and sorrow. He knows exactly where Keanu's gone in his mind because he was there the night everything almost went horribly, irreversibly wrong. Keanu finally lifts his head, eyes tracing the outline of the studio lights before settling on Jimmy. The practiced late-night smile doesn't come. Instead, his voice is low, almost apologetic. "Yeah," he says quietly, "I remember that night." The room leans in. There's something in his tone, like he's about to confess to more than just a crazy stunt. He glances once more at Marcus, as if asking for permission to say what he's never said on TV before. Marcus gives the slightest nod. Keanu turns back to Jimmy. "Can I tell it my way?" he asks. Jimmy, a little thrown, nods and leans back, signaling the crew to hold off on any music or cuts. The energy of the show shifts. It's no longer a segment, it's a story. Keanu takes a breath, his thumb unconsciously rubbing the edge of his ring. "All right," he says, eyes distant now, filling with old headlights and the echo of screeching tires. "It started the night I thought being fearless made me strong, and I almost found out how wrong I was." And with the audience hanging on every word, Keanu begins to speak. Just as the memory he's about to reveal reaches the moment where a single split-second decision, driven by pride and pain, sends a car hurtling toward a stuntwoman he secretly cared about more than he ever admitted. The night on the freeway. Cars were lined up like steel animals under the floodlights, engines idling, exhaust curling into the cold air. The freeway was shut down for miles, a private playground for controlled chaos. Keanu remembered standing on a mark of white tape, costume jacket flapping in the wind, as the assistant director shouted into a megaphone and crew members rushed like ants on a ticking clock. This was the big sequence, the one the studio would use in every trailer. In the script, his character was supposed to leap from a motorcycle onto the hood of a speeding car, slide across the windshield, and fire a shot through the driver's side window. On paper, it sounded insane. On set, it felt even more so. He had a stunt double, one of the best in the business. And yet, after weeks of pushing his body, learning the choreography, feeling adrenaline roar in his veins, Keanu wanted to do it himself. Not just because he loved the craft, but because, if he was honest, he was tired of feeling replaceable, tired of people saying, the stunt guy did the real work. He was grieving a loss in his personal life at the time, something he never talked about publicly, and the pain had quietly twisted into something dangerous. The need to feel pain on his own terms, under his own control. That's when she walked up, Elena, his co-star and stunt partner for the sequence. Tough, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who laughed with her whole body and didn't care that she could outrun half the guys on set. She was in full costume, helmet under her arm, a smear of engine grease streaked across one cheek. "You sure about this, Reeves?" she asked, studying his face like she could see every thought he was trying to hide. "You eat it out there, and I gotta pretend it's all part of the script. I don't do funerals on weekdays." He tried to play it off, smirking. "I'll be fine. Marcus said we're locked in. We rehearsed it 100 times. She didn't smile back. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "No, Marcus said we're locked in if you let the double do the transfer. You going solo is not the same thing." That flicker of concern in her eyes made something twist in his chest. He liked her more than he wanted to admit, liked how she didn't care about fame, only about everyone going home in one piece. But liking her just made him more determined to look fearless. "Trust me," he said, with a confidence he wasn't entirely sure he felt. "I've got this." Across the lane, Marcus watched the exchange with a frown. He walked over, his boots thudding against the asphalt, headset hanging around his neck. "We don't need this," Marcus said simply. "The double's ready. You did enough in the close-ups to sell it. Don't turn one good performance into your last." Keanu felt his jaw tight. "You told me once the audience can tell when it's really you," he answered. "You said that's where the heart is," Marcus sighed. "Yeah, but I also said you don't have to bleed for every frame." The director called out, "Last looks, let's go, people." It felt like a clock striking midnight. In that charged second, Keanu looked from Marcus to Elena. One part of him wanted to say, "You're right, I'm scared." Another part, the louder, wounded part, refused to back down. He swung his leg over the motorcycle, helmet strapped on, heart pounding. "We're rolling," the assistant director shouted. Engines revved louder. Elena stared at him through her visor, eyes hard and scared at the same time. She mouthed two words, "Don't fall." The stunt began like every rehearsal, the roar of engines, the choreographed dance of metal and light. Keanu accelerated, wind slamming into his chest, the freeway blurring around him. Ahead, the car he had to jump onto swerved into place, perfectly timed. But as he rose on the bike, ready to launch himself onto the hood, a sudden, tiny slip, a patch of leftover moisture on the asphalt, threw off his balance. It wasn't much, just an inch of difference. But in a stunt, an inch could redraw your entire life. The bike jolted sideways, his body twisting off script, the car racing closer, Elena's vehicle angling in from the next lane exactly as planned. Only now nothing was going according to plan. Keanu felt the bike buck. For one horrifying heartbeat, he realized his trajectory had changed. He wasn't going to hit the hood of the car. He was flying straight toward Elena's windshield. And in a fraction of a second that would stretch across years of his memory, he understood. His need to look fearless was about to kill the bravest person on that freeway. Impact, silence, and the choice. The world shrank to the sound of his own breath inside the helmet and the hollow rush of air as his body left the motorcycle. Time did that strange, cruel thing it does in real danger. It slowed down just enough to let him feel every detail. The glare of the headlights, the metallic tang of fear on his tongue. Elena's eyes widening behind her visor as she realized the stunt had gone sideways. Somewhere, far away, he thought he heard Marcus shouting to cut, but it was too late. The cameras were already recording the worst moment of Keanu's life in crisp, cinematic clarity. Keanu's training took over, but training had never covered hurtling toward the person you care about instead of a stunt car. He twisted midair, trying to redirect his weight, aiming his shoulder toward the hood, his body screaming in protest. The bike, now riderless, skidded across the asphalt, sparks flying. The carefully choreographed plan turned into chaos. Elena had a split second to react. She didn't freeze. She didn't flinch. She did the thing that defined who she was. She turned her wheel toward danger instead of away from it. She jerked her car left, taking the hit herself. Keanu crashed into the side of her vehicle, slamming against the metal with a sickening thud, rolling across the hood, glass exploding like a rain of tiny stars. The sound of crunching steel and shattering windshield swallowed the set. The camera operators ducked. Crew members shouted. The director's voice cracked as he screamed, "Cut, cut, cut." But the cars were still sliding. The world still spinning, gravity pulling everything down whether they were ready or not. When the motion finally stopped, Keanu lay sprawled on the pavement, his helmet cracked, lungs burning with each breath. His ears rang so loudly it was hard to tell if the set was silent or if he just couldn't hear anything. For a terrifying moment, he didn't know if he could move. Pain roared through his shoulder and ribs, but underneath the physical shock, a sharper fear cut through. Elena. Where was Elena? He forced his fingers to twitch, then his arms, then his legs. Pain shot through his side as he rolled over. "Elena!" he croaked, voice raw. He yanked off his broken helmet and tried to get up, only to stumble and nearly collapse again. Hands caught him under the arms, Marcus, face pale, headset dangling uselessly. "Stay down," Marcus ordered, but Keanu shoved him weakly away. "Where is she?" he gasped. "Marcus, where is she?" The wrecked stunt car sat at an angle, smoke rising from the hood. The driver's side door was crushed but not caved in, twisted just enough that the crew couldn't immediately pull it open. Elena was half visible through the cracked glass, moving, thank God, but slumped. Her eyes fluttered as paramedics rushed in. Keanu's stomach lurched. This wasn't a cool behind-the-scenes story. This wasn't something you laughed about in blooper reels. This was his fault, and he knew it before anyone said a word. As paramedics worked to stabilize Elena, Marcus turned on Keanu with a fury Keanu had never seen in him. "You arrogant idiot," Marcus snapped, voice breaking with a mix of fear and rage. "I told you we didn't need this, I told you." Keanu felt the words hit harder than any impact, his throat tightened. "Is she?" He couldn't finish the question, couldn't say okay, because what if she was? Marcus' eyes softened for a second. "She's breathing," he said. "That's all I know." "You're going to the hospital, too." Keanu shook his head, stubborn even now. "I'm fine." He was, his ribs screamed and his shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, but guilt was heavier than any injury. He tried to walk toward the paramedics, toward Elena, but security and medics blocked him. One of them pushed him gently toward an ambulance. "You want to help her," the medic said firmly. "Don't slow us down, get checked out." Lying on the gurney, watching the freeway lights smear across the back window as the ambulance pulled away, Keanu felt something crack inside that had nothing to do with bones. For years, he'd thrown himself into his roles, into danger, into exhaustion, convincing himself it was all for the art, for the fans, for authenticity. Now, with the siren wailing and his own blood drying on his neck, he saw the truth. Part of him had been trying to outrun his own grief by flirting with death in slow motion, borrow after dangerous borrow. And tonight, the bill had almost come due for someone else. At the hospital, hours blurred into white corridors and fluorescent lights. They stitched him up, scanned his ribs, wrapped his shoulder. Nurses came and went. Studio reps called, lawyers whispered, insurance people hovered like worried shadows. But Keanu only had one question over and over. "How is Elena?" No one had a satisfying answer. "In surgery. Still in observation. We're waiting for updates." Every vague reply tightened the knot in his chest. Finally, as dawn began to pale the sky outside the waiting room windows, Marcus walked in, his steps heavy, his expression unreadable. Keanu stood, ignoring the ache in his ribs. "Tell me," he said, voice hoarse. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "She's alive. Concussion, broken leg, some internal bruising, but the doctors say she's tough. She'll recover." Relief hit Keanu so hard his knees nearly gave out. He grabbed the back of a chair, breathing shakily. "It should have been me," he whispered. Marcus sat down across from him. "In a way it was," he said. "You took the hit too, just not the one you think." Keanu frowned, confused. Marcus leaned forward. You gonna keep living like this, trying to prove you're unbreakable until you finally prove the opposite? You're not the only one on these sets. Your choices drag people with you. You scare me more than any explosion we set off." The words landed with brutal honesty, and for once, Keanu didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He was too tired, too scared of who he was turning into. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked quietly. "Quit, stop doing my own stunts, hide." Marcus shook his head. "No, learn, grow. There's a big difference between courage and recklessness. You've been confusing the two." Marcus hesitated, then added, "You want to really be fearless? Try being gentle with yourself and the people around you. That's a lot harder than jumping off a moving car." Keanu stared at the linoleum floor, Marcus, words echoing louder than any director's praise ever had. He thought about Elena lying in that hospital bed because she'd chosen, in a single instant, to save him from the worst version of himself. He thought about all the people who had quietly caught him over the years while he insisted on falling. Something in him shifted, subtle but real. But the real test wouldn't come in the hospital or even on the next set. It would come much later, in a different kind of spotlight, when a late-night host would bring up that night like it was just another wild Hollywood story. And Keanu would have to decide whether to laugh it off or finally tell the truth about who he'd been and who he was trying to become. Back in the studio, back to the edge. On Jimmy's stage, that entire night on the freeway flickered behind Keanu's eyes in a handful of seconds. The audience only saw a slight tremor in his jaw, the way his gaze drifted past the cameras as if watching something none of them could see. Jimmy, sensing the shift, lowered the cue card in his hand. The teleprompter still waited with per-written jokes and light banter, but the room's energy had changed. This wasn't going to be the segment they planned in the production meeting. Keanu cleared his throat, his voice steady but soft. "Everyone loves the stunt part of that story," he began, his fingers loosely interlaced in his lap. "The crash, the broken glass, the whole crazy actor doing his own thing angle. It cuts together like a great action reel." He paused, eyes dropping for a moment. "What they don't see is the part I'm not proud of." A hush rolled through the studio. Even the band sat perfectly still. Jimmy shifted in his chair, his expression no longer the exaggerated, cartoonish surprise he was known for, but something quieter, more human. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," he said gently. It wasn't a line, it sounded like an honest offer. Keanu gave a small nod of acknowledgement, but he didn't stop. "Maybe I do," he answered, "because I think we glamorize this stuff a lot, the danger, the risk, the no-fear thing, and I wasn't fearless that night. I was just lost." The audience didn't know about the losses that had hollowed him out in the years before that stunt, the private heartaches he'd carried silently. They didn't know that part of what drove him into the most dangerous scenes was a quiet belief that pain was the only language he truly deserved. But as he looked out over the crowd, he saw faces. Young, old, some smiling, some serious, and he wondered how many of them were also hiding bruises behind their daily performances. "There was a woman on that set," Keanu continued, glancing toward Marcus. "Elena, one of the best stunt performers I've ever worked with, stronger than me in 1,000 ways. I thought I was doing that stunt to prove my own courage, but when things went wrong, she's the one who saved me." His voice caught on the last word. He took a slow breath. "She turned into my trajectory, took the hit, because that's what real courage looks like, protecting someone else when you easily could have saved yourself." A low murmur moved through the audience, surprise, empathy, the quiet intake of shared emotion. Jimmy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, caught somewhere between host and witness. "What happened to her?" he asked carefully. Keanu's lips curved into a sad, grateful smile. "She lived, she healed, she went back to work, probably did 10 crazier stunts after that, but something in me broke open. I realized I'd been treating my own life like it was disposable. And worse, I was dragging other people into that mindset." He glanced at Marcus again, and this time he reached out, resting a hand on the older man's shoulder. "This guy," Keanu said, "pulled me aside after everything and told me something I never forgot. He said, the bravest thing you can do is show up tomorrow and be better than you were today. Not more extreme, just kinder, smarter, safer, more present." At the time, I thought he was just talking about stunts. Turns out he was talking about life. The audience was fully with him now, not as fans watching a star, but as people listening to another person admit his own flaws. Keanu shifted in his seat, his posture a little straighter. "So I made some changes," he said. "I stopped saying yes to every dare just because I was scared of looking weak. I started listening to the people who loved me instead of the voices in my head telling me I had to earn my existence by suffering for it. I still love doing my own stunts. But I don't use them as a way to run from myself anymore. Jimmy exhaled slowly, his eyes shining more than his usual stage lighting could explain. That's not the version Marcus told us, he admitted softly, and the audience chuckled gently, not in mockery, but as a release of tension. He gave us the PG-13 cut. Marcus smiled faintly. Well, I didn't think we were coming here for therapy, he said. The line got a laugh, but there was a tremor of truth beneath it. Keanu looked down at his hands again, then back up, as if making a decision right there under the lights. You know what the wildest part is, he said. I used to think people only respected you if you looked untouchable, bulletproof. Now, whenever I meet fans or stunt guys or young actors, the moments that stick with them aren't when I jumped off something. It's when I sat with them, listened, showed up when no one was filming. Turns out, kindness leaves a bigger mark than any action scene. Jimmy let the words hang in the air, not rushing to fill the silence. The control room was probably debating whether to cut to commercial, but nobody on that stage wanted to move yet. So, Jimmy finally said, voice quieter than usual, if you could go back to that night on the freeway, before the cameras rolled, before the stunt, what would you tell yourself? Keanu leaned back, eyes drifting up to the studio ceiling as if trying to see through it, up into the past. For a long moment he didn't answer. The audience waited, breath held, sensing that whatever he was about to say wasn't just for his younger self. It was for everyone in the room and everyone watching who'd ever confused destruction with bravery. He lowered his gaze again, eyes settling directly into the lens of the main camera, speaking now not to Jimmy, not to Marcus, but to the millions unseen on the other side of the screen. I'd tell him, Keanu began slowly, each word deliberate, you don't have to hurt to prove you deserve to be here. And as that sentence sank into the silence, Keanu's hand curled into a fist on his knee, the weight of what he still hadn't confessed pressing forward, ready to turn this late-night conversation into something even more personal. Because there was one thing he had never told anyone on television before, about what he did after that accident, and the promise he made that would change the way he lived every day that followed.